On behalf of CAAR, I would like to call this meeting to order and welcome you, as well as members from the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association, to our virtual Annual Development and Economic Summit via GoToWebinar. To begin today's meeting, please stand where you are and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and please be seated. Now we will be moving on to the approval of the minutes from our May meeting. The minutes were sent to you as a link in your CAAR meeting reminder and are also available in the handout section in your GoToWebinar toolbar. Are there any additions or corrections to the distributed minutes? If so, please submit your feedback using the question chat box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If there are no changes or corrections, the minutes stand approved as distributed. Thank you. Next, I would like to recognize today's sponsors, which are the Charlottesville Young Professionals Network title sponsors, Blue Ridge Home Builders Association, CNF Mortgage Corporation, it's Bill Hamrick and Buster Fox, Closure Title and Settlement Company, Southern Development Homes, Tao Insurance Service, and UVA Community Credit Union and Member Services. Since we are not able to connect in person with these sponsors, you do have material from them in your handouts. In addition, after this meeting, you will be sent a follow-up email from CAAR where you can participate in a virtual scavenger hunt. This involves you going to each sponsor's website and searching for information and entering it into a survey. There are 10 questions. Entries with the correct information will be entered into a lottery to win 2 prizes. A $100 smoked kitchen and tap gift card, very nice, and a $50 Champion Grill gift card, also very nice. Thank you again to the Charlottesville YPN title sponsors for your continued support. Before we move into today's program, I have a few important items to go over. I want to reiterate how important it is to CAAR to keep members safe and healthy. While CAAR remains at a level 2 in our business continuity plan, and you can find that on the CAAR.com webpage, what level 2 means. The CAAR leadership team and staff continue to track the COVID-19 outbreak and evaluate our operational response. So at this point, I am going to go over what level 2 means exactly. We have modified CAAR building access, days and hours. Members are allowed to pick up their online realtor store orders during the dedicated pickup days and times. Staff is working remotely and available in the office by appointment only. They are available through the general CAAR phone line, direct phone lines, as well as email. CAAR-sponsored events and classes are to be hosted on a case-by-case basis. The Hillsdale Conference Center is open for rentals or appointments. If you need a reminder on who our CAAR staff members are and their areas of responsibility, please go to CAAR.com, followed by the About Staff tab, and then the Staff sub-tab. Just as CAAR continues to support your business, we are finding ways to support our local community. For the membership's request to support the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank, CAAR initiated a fundraiser to support the Mobile Food Pantry Program. The Mobile Food Pantry Program was created to reach some of the food bank's most vulnerable clients, those living in more remote rural areas with no access to commercial food providers and/or food assistance services. Announced in CAAR communications as well as the local media, we raised over $10,000, which was then matched by a $10,000 donation from Virginia Estates, a tremendous accomplishment. If the amount of money doesn't speak loudly to you, maybe this will. Our donation is able to provide over 80,000 meals to our local neighbors. As we thank the donors, which are listed our neighbors. There are 11 mobile food pantry sites where the food bank brings a truck full of fresh produce and shelf-stable protein to be distributed to families in need. 8 of the mobile food pantries are in the Charlottesville area, serving an average of 175 families per distribution. Our donation was not only the largest online fundraiser the food bank has received to date, but our donation will feed all 8 food pantries in Charlottesville for 1 month. As you know, this pandemic is far from over, so CAAR will continue to fundraise for the food bank for the foreseeable future. Another way CAAR continues to support the community is by co-partnering on another blood drive with the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association at the Hillsdale Conference Center on this Thursday coming up, September 24th. One donation can potentially save 3 lives, so please make an appointment to donate using the American Red Cross website. CAAR members are committed to modeling diversity and inclusion for the entire community and to maintain an inclusive environment with equitable treatment for all. To empower realtors and affiliates to address racial injustice in our community and around the nation, CAAR, in partnership with the Blue Ridge chapter of the Women's Council of Realtors, is thrilled to present a virtual diversity and inclusion series. This series is made possible by a $5,000 National Association of Realtors Diversity Grant. Each session has a specific theme and 1 or more top-notch speakers. Session 1, entitled Awareness, What You Don't Know, will feature Richard Rothstein, author of the book, The Color of Law. Session 2, entitled Changing Your Perspective and Behavior, will feature 3 diversity, equity, and inclusion subject matter experts. Charlene Green of the Piedmont Housing Alliance, Allison Lynn of Allison and Partners, and Charm Bullard of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities. Finally, our Session 3, Moving Forward at Home with Diversity, will feature a 2-day certification course taught by our own instructor, Donna Patton. This series is our opportunity to have an open and safe dialogue about diversity and inclusion as it relates to our community and association. In addition to the series, CAAR has developed a diversity and inclusion project team whose responsibilities include, but are not limited to, 1, raising awareness of how discrimination can play out in a systematic fashion in the real estate industry. 2, guiding the association and lowering barriers for minority groups to participate in the real estate industry and within our association. I hope each of you will participate in these sessions and provide feedback on how we can develop and deliver future diversity and inclusion programming. Now, at this time, I would like to recognize the 2019 Virginia REALTORS Honor Society recipients. The Virginia REALTORS Honor Society rewards and encourages participation in leadership and educational activities of the local, state, and national realtor organizations. I would like to recognize the following realtors: Kim Armstrong, Reeves Bailey, Teely Jennifer, Kathy Markwood, Donna Patton, Pat Surrey, Pat Whithelm, and Arlene Yobbs. On behalf of CAAR, we congratulate each of you on your amazing accolade. Now, this year's summit theme is Moving Forward in a Masked Society. And how fitting as Virginia Realtors rolled out a Realtors Political Action Committee campaign where if you invest $30, you will receive a Realtor branded face mask. Our PAC remains your business insurance, working for your business and private property rights in a nonpartisan manner at the local, state, and national levels. Here are a few influential members who invested in our PAC and are sporting their Realtor branded masks while out and about town. If you have not already invested in our PAC, now is a great time, as you still have an opportunity to receive a Realtor branded mask when you invest $30. Next time you are in the single sign-on dashboard, please go to the RPAC icon and make your investment today. If you have any questions about RPAC, I encourage you to reach out to RPAC Chair Kim Armstrong or Vice Chair Jim Dickerson. Before we move to our Development and Economic Summit, I would like to thank our project team who helped us plan this excellent program. I'm sure everyone participating in this summit is constantly being asked by their clients, where do you see the real estate market heading in the next couple of months? If only we had a crystal ball to help us with that. Well, wait a minute, we do, sort of. I'm thrilled to have two industry experts, Dr. Robert Dietz, Chief Economist with the National Home Builders Association, and Dr. Lisa Sturtevant, Chief Economist with Virginia REALTORS. Robert will speak first with the national perspective, and then we will move into a state and local forecast with Lisa. We will then hold a joint Q&A session, which will be facilitated by Jody Mills, President of the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association, at the end of the two presentations. To submit your questions, please use the question/chat box in the upper right corner of your screen. At this point, I'm going to hand the meeting over to you, Robert. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. It's great to be able to join CAAR today, and I want to recognize those members of the Blue Ridge Home Builders Association who have joined, and I'd like to thank Jody Mills in particular for inviting me to join you. I'm going to present you our current economic and housing outlook. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I hope everyone can see the slides there. It's always good to be able to kind of talk about where we are in the economy. I'm going to focus on the national level statistics, and I think Lisa, who I'm glad to be able to be on the same panel as her, is going to look at more local data. So let's take a look at our current headline stats. We think we're in about a 2-year period for economic recovery. Housing has been the bright spot for the economy. In fact, housing is about 16% of GDP all in when you count building and the flow of services that come from housing. This is traditionally the role that housing plays, and clearly policymakers have their eyes on housing because housing can be a source of economic growth as we move forward. It's amazing the degree to which the data in housing has been solid, some would even say strong. A good example of that is the gains that we've seen from mortgage purchase applications. The Mortgage Bankers Association just released data yesterday showing mortgages are up 40% year over year. It's obviously being stimulated by low interest rates, but the other factor involved is the fact that people are very focused on home and the importance of home and a growing role for housing. We see this in the new construction side data. New home sales are up 8% year to date thus far in 2020. That is truly remarkable, given the fact that we had double-digit unemployment recently. And of course, inventory remains a real key challenge for the housing market. For new home sales nationwide, we've only got a 4-month supply. Typically, it's about 6 months, and that's one of the reasons, of course, that we continue to see home price gains continue. There are risks. I think that the top headline risk is renewed lockdowns. You mentioned crystal ball. I think one of the harder things for us economists to forecast is the degree to which the virus itself is going to affect the economy. But I think we have to consider that as a potential risk, particularly as we move into the fall and the winter. It's worth noting some of the virus data is getting better, but we saw that earlier in the summer as well. So it's probably not time to celebrate and kind of look to the end. I think ultimately we're going to have to get a vaccine for the overall economy to recognize something resembling the new normal coming into play. The other risk is lumber. If housing's been the bright spot for the economy, lumber is the factor that could really make that bright spot flicker. Lumber prices are up a lot, and I'm going to show you the data on that and give you an indication of how that's going to affect the new construction side of the market. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is what we've been calling the suburban shift. I think there's a renewed focus, particularly on single-family housing in lower density areas. And this is a topic that's under a lot of debate among economists. I'm firmly in the camp that believes that this shift is real and that we can see it in the data, particularly in the rental data in terms of the outflow and in the new construction data in terms of where that demand is going. So I'll give you some maps that'll illustrate those points. All right, so let's take a look first at our overall macro forecast. The second quarter of 2020 is in our rearview mirror right now, but it was the worst performing quarter since World War II, about more than a negative 30% growth rate for the quarter. For the third quarter, we're definitely going to be up. Now, my team, our forecast had been very conservative the last few months. We thought the third quarter we'd see something like a 10% growth rate. And the last week, we've actually upgraded that to about a 20% growth rate. And we're still more conservative than most forecasters. Most forecasters are indicating something closer to a 30% growth rate for the third quarter. I think the data may surprise the downside, particularly because small businesses are having trouble. The retail sector continues to face headwinds in terms of the virus, and there are other factors kind of holding back growth. But nonetheless, the third quarter will mark the beginning of the true rebound. And then growth is going to moderate as we go into 2021. We've got a little bit of a kind of an uptick above trend. You can see in the second quarter of 2021 that we think will come when we get a vaccine. And by the way, that is another macro risk. I mentioned that housing is really benefiting from low interest rates. At some point, we will see a tick up in interest rates. And if you're trying to figure out when that moment is, it's probably when society as a whole realizes we're going to get a vaccine. And it's going to be mass deployed, because at that moment, growth expectations will increase. And anytime you get an increase in growth expectations, interest rates take a step up. And that would be a moment for a headwind for the housing market. Now, on the labor market side, there's good news and there's bad news. Now, the good news is we did not get to a 20-25% unemployment rate nationwide. And that was certainly feared, and it was actually due to policy support, the stimulus efforts, the actions of the Federal Reserve that really prevented that kind of nightmare Great Depression level unemployment. The bad news is that we're expecting about an 8% unemployment rate by the end of the year. We're pretty close to that right now at 8.4. So the improvement is going to slow. And the thing to keep in mind is the peak unemployment rate of the Great Recession, more than a decade ago, was 10%. So we're pretty close to that peak right now. So we're off the 14 to 15% rate that we saw recently, and that's good news for housing demand. But we've got a lot of room for improvement, and that's the reason we think it's going to take about 2 years for the economy to heal. The other factor is duration matters. If you're looking at individuals in terms of making big life decisions like buying a home, people who are unemployed for longer than 6 months tend to drop those kinds of plans, whether it's buying a home, buying a car, college plans, those sorts of things. So if we can keep individual unemployment spells to less than 6 months, that will increase the prospects for a V-shaped recovery. I mentioned interest rates. This is our NAHB interest rate forecast. The red line is the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. I mentioned that tick up. When is that moment that we're going to get some growth, despite the fact that the Federal Reserve is not going to raise interest rates for years? I mean, they have told us that they're not thinking about raising interest rates. And that's definitely good for housing demand. But at some moment, the rates are going to begin to tick up from these lows. We got the 30-year fixed rate mortgage below 3% right now. And again, I do think that will happen in 2021 when we get realization of a mass deployed vaccine. Now, so we're not going to see a big increase in interest rates, but it's going to be enough given the fact that we're at already historically low interest rates to slow the market just a little bit. We'll be talking about the market taking a breather, for example. So we're not talking about big declines, but it's something out there potentially next year to keep in mind in terms of rates. The other factor is, why has the housing market been so strong? Well, demographics. We had a tremendous amount of momentum coming into the market at the start of the year. And this graph kind of illustrates the shift from rentership to homeownership that occurred in recent years. The bars you're looking at, the red bars, for example, are the year-over-year gains by quarter in the number of renters. You can see from 2010 to 2016, the housing market was basically rental driven. And then in 2016, the momentum shifted over to the blue side, the owner-occupied, the homeownership side. Why did this happen? Well, the millennials. The millennials increasingly moving into their 30s, They want single family homes. And so we get a turnaround in the home ownership rate. And you can see that clearly on this slide, that the home ownership rate bottoming out in 2016 when that momentum shift, and then it's been trending higher. And in fact, that first quarter of 2020 was the best quarter we had had for the demand for home ownership since the Great Recession itself. So there were tremendous demographic tailwinds supporting the market before things softened up due to the recession and the concerns over the virus. So we were going to have a great 2020, and now we've got a year of 2020 with a lot of economic challenges, but one in which the housing market is the overperforming sector. Some important footnotes to that, of course, and this has gotten some media attention in recent days. We do have a large share of young adults living with their parents. Now, I've got data going back a couple of decades. The 18 to 24-year-old crowd's been going up. That really has a lot more to do with the fact you've got more people attending college. The 25 to 34-year-old data point is the factor that's holding back rental demand and for sale housing demand. And the shame of this was, and we've got census data here going through 2018, it was finally beginning to kind of level off. We had gone from 1 in 10 young adults living with their parents to 1 in 5. So the rate had doubled. We had seen some improvement. It didn't look like it was going to get worse. In fact, maybe with low unemployment rates, it was going to get better. And then the virus hits. And so recent data has shown that that's beginning to grow again. If we're looking for a source of sideline housing demand, this is it. So as the labor market recovers in the coming years, we need to be thinking about how to encourage household formations, particularly among younger potential householders. And of course, I mentioned demographics a lot. Every economist has got some version of this slide. It's a population profile in the United States. The blue line going through the slide is essentially the count of people by age. You can see the age at the horizontal axis at the bottom of the slide. And I've got the generational groups there listed in boxes. So for example, in the middle of the slide, you can see my generation X. We're a smaller generational group compared to the millennials to our left. And that's the largest generational group. And as they move through the system and age, the demand for single family housing over the next 10 years is going to grow and grow and grow. So the inventory challenge that we face in the market, both on the new side and the existing side, is going to persist, and it is something that is going to last over the next 10 years. Now, if you're more the gloom and doom type, you can take a look at Gen Z and the generational group coming after Gen Z, which we're calling Gen Alpha. They are smaller generational groups, and that will affect rental markets over the next 10 to 15 years. All right. So I talked about macro, I talked about demographic. What about supply side issues that are preventing home building, preventing construction? Well, we've had a skilled labor challenge, and that's been true in the construction industry for a number of years. And in a weird sort of way, it's continuing despite the fact that we've got elevated unemployment. The industry as a whole, the home building industry, builders and remodelers, lost just under 500,000 jobs in March and April. Now, the good news, and this is consistent with the idea that we were desperate for skilled labor, was between May and August, we gained 81% of those jobs back, which there's no other sector that looks like that. Builders are starved for labor. So they're taking this moment and opportunity to recruit people into the industry. That's not a quick effort, but it's got to be done. And then the data on this slide, which is construction sector productivity, the red line, it's been flat for the last couple of decades. So it's a skilled labor challenge. We've got to bring workers in, and we have to teach them how to be carpenters and electricians and stonemasons and all the other occupations that are required to build housing. So that is an ongoing challenge, and certainly it's something that local associations combined with trade schools and community colleges are going to continue to have to work on, because we have a true middle skills crisis in the United States. And the other supply side factor, I mentioned this at the beginning, lumber. Lumber prices have gone, I'm searching for the technical description here, we'll just use the word insane since mid-April. And in fact, the data has outpaced my slide in this case. I've got here lumber prices going up to $919 per thousand board feet. They're actually now above $980 per thousand board feet. That's a 170% increase since mid-April. Why? Well, because the housing market's hot. The remodeling sector, single family construction, even apartment construction have outperformed our forecasts from March. And at that time, as we went into recession, sawmills reduced output and then got caught with low inventory. You combine that with tariffs on Canadian lumber, we get a third of our lumber from Canada. And the result is lots of price volatility and growing prices in lumber markets. This is having a real impact for builders, and it will filter through the market and have an impact on the supply. We estimate right now that these increases in lumber prices are adding about $16,000 to a typical new build, and that means new home prices are going to be going up in the months ahead, just due to the cost side that I've got listed here. All right, so if we put this all together, we'll take a look at our forecast. This is our national single-family construction forecast. We still have 2020 down slightly for the year, about a 4% growth rate, but we've been chasing this forecast up. In other words, I think a few months ago, we were talking about more than a 10% decline for single-family construction, but builder confidence and our sentiment indicators keep going up, and so we keep revising higher, particularly as the local data comes in. Charlottesville is fairly close to the national average, down 6% year to date. But again, moving up that curve as we see demand improve in low density markets. Some trends that are worth noting on the new construction size. New home size has been falling for the last 4 or 5 years. I think that trend is now going to end. We see this in the remodeling sector. We see it anecdotally with respect to consumer preferences. People want more space. They want one home office. I've even heard builders come to me and talk about 2 home offices. And so the result is that new home size, which had been falling as we added entry-level type housing on the new construction side, is now going to begin to rise again as people begin to use their homes or continue to use their homes for more purposes. And I mentioned geography. This is the suburban shift. Now, there's a lot going on this map, but basically the blue counties here are the exurbs of the United States. They're the large metropolitan outlying areas. The counties in orange, which include Charlottesville, are the small metro outlying areas, the outer suburbs. These are 2 of the best performing economic geographies in the United States in terms of single family construction when we look at the second quarter data. Now, the 4-quarter moving average of the large metro exurbs up about 6%. Again, that's pretty good. And if you look at the small metro suburbs, the orange areas, they were the only economic geography that we track in this index that we call the Home Building Geography Index that posted a gain in the second quarter compared to the second quarter of 2019. They were up almost 3%. That's remarkable because the nation as a whole in the second quarter was actually down 24% on single family construction for that quarter. So this is my evidence, in addition to some other data from the Home Building Geography Index, that shows the suburban shift is real. It's causing rental vacancy rates to go up in high density areas. It's causing rents to fall. Rents are down 10% in New York City, for example, and it's causing construction to grow in these outlying lower density areas. And by the way, I do think this is going to persist beyond even a vaccine. I think the changes we're seeing with telecommuting means people are going to work from home more, and when they can do that, they can drive further to qualify. So these kinds of markets are the markets that we think are set for construction growth in the years ahead, and we'll see price growth as well because I think demand is moving out into these outlying areas. In terms of apartment construction, apartments and multifamily face a larger uphill climb in terms of recovery. We do have the market down 16% this year, and then kind of a weak return back to something we think is normal, close to about 340,000 units a year. A lot of markets right now are seeing apartment weakness. Apartment market data tends to be fairly noisy, but you can see here in Charlottesville, about a 50% year-to-date decline. I think we're going to see a lot of this kind of action. We're seeing some build out in apartments right now of projects that were in the system already, but generally speaking, apartment construction is going to be weak over the next couple of years. One exception to that, though, and this is kind of builds on the suburban shift, the areas that you see on this map, which are basically everything but the large metros, so you've got in brown, small metro cores, orange are those small metro outlying areas I identified before, and the yellow and the red are small towns and rural markets. This represents a third of apartment construction, but these markets were actually outpacing the areas in white in terms of apartment construction. So we're going to see continued gains in multifamily within a certain subsector, and that subsector will be more garden-style apartments, low-rise, basically units that have a door facing right to the outside. So places that don't rely on an elevator and don't rely on a lot of common space. And then the remodeling market. I said one of the reasons that lumber prices have gained so much is remodeling. Remodeling is doing very well this year. We're looking at about a 7% gain for the year, growth going forward. People are fixing up their homes. They're modifying their homes. I think we're going to see important changes to home design coming out of the virus. And, I think just home offices alone, combined with home workout spaces, have created a growth environment for remodelers. And when I talk to remodelers, they all say that business is very strong. And then just on kind of wrap things up, I think one of the important things from an economics perspective is to contrast the current downturn with what we went through in the Great Recession. In the Great Recession, we had a downturn that was concentrated in the single family industry due to excess supply. This time, the downturn is much more concentrated in commercial real estate, non-residential construction in particular. So the line in blue is residential fixed investment. It's a measure of home buildings, dollar volume, when you add single family, multifamily, and remodeling all together. And we think it's going to be about a 2-year recovery period, drawn out more by the apartment sector, certainly, than single family and remodeling. Compare that to the recovery period that's going to be required for non-residential construction. That output gap could be 4, 5, or even 6 years. So we're going to see declines for office construction, for highway construction, and other parts of the non-housing construction side of the system. So I think that illustrates the degree to which housing is the bright spot. It is going to recover fast. We've got some challenges in terms of lumber. We've got ongoing challenges in terms of skilled labor. But this is really a moment for the housing sector to shine. We're adding jobs. We're providing economic impact. And we see a lot of growth in these suburban and outlying markets. And with that, I want to thank you very much. And I look forward to Q&A.
Robert, thank you. I love the information that comes in these reports and hearing what's going on in the housing sector, especially new builds and factors and everything. It's a lot of good information there, a lot to take in. Thanks again. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Sturtevant. Lisa, thanks for being with us this morning. You have the floor.
Great. Happy to be here. And as we get set up, we'll be sharing my screen here in a minute. Really interesting stuff. Robert, thank you so much. And looking forward to sharing a little bit about the Charlottesville area and about Virginia. I think all of the context that Robert provided, I would wholeheartedly agree with. I think there's a lot of trends underlying that have to do with coronavirus. There are also some trends that were in place long before coronavirus and will continue as we go through. So I wanted to talk a little bit and separate out sort of what's specific to COVID, what is kind of more longer term trends, and then where we might expect to go from here. So I want to look specifically at Virginia's housing market, focusing primarily on the resale market. The data that we present is based on data from the multiple listing services, which does include some new construction, but is primarily resale. The good news is that as Robert said, all of the news coming out of the housing industry is really positive. And while the chances of a V-shaped recovery for the overall economy, I think, are less clear, and I would argue that seems pretty unlikely, in that we're going to think about a different shape, like a W or a swoosh or maybe a K. We can talk about what that might mean. We certainly did see a V-shaped recovery in the housing market. You can see this shows monthly home sales data here in Virginia for 2018, 19, and 20. Now, I circled sort of the typical spring market, right? And the realtors that are on the webinar know, sales go up March, April, May, June. There's a little bit of a tailing off in July, typically, as folks go on vacation and do other things. And in Virginia, we sort of had a pretty flat March, April, and May. but we surged back in terms of home sales in June and July. And in July, sales were up 13% over a year ago, up 10% over June, the prior month. In Charlottesville, we saw a similar pattern, right? So we saw a little bit of a slowdown in March, April, May, and then we saw sales up pretty dramatically in July, up June to July by 14%. And again, July is typically a month where sales transactions slow a little bit. And so we saw a really big surge in July. And so what this means is we expected, I think, a lot of that spring sales market to just simply be pushed into summer as opposed to being lost altogether. And I think that that's what we're seeing in this most recent summer data. And a lot of the reasons why we're seeing such a resilient housing market here in Virginia and really across the country is despite the fact that there have been significant job losses across the country and here in Virginia. At one point, we had job losses in Virginia totaling more than 400,000 jobs, which were lost in March and April. When we take a look at the folks who have been most impacted by job loss, the losses have been concentrated in a few sectors, right? The sectors you might expect, accommodation, food services, retail. And when you look at those numbers, those populations, those workers, because of age, because of wages, tend to be highly concentrated as renters. Whereas folks who are more in the home buying population, in professional services jobs, in government jobs, those jobs are relatively insulated from loss. And as Robert mentioned, more folks are able to move their work home and continue to work without any loss of income or loss of jobs. Now, that is not to minimize at all the effects that this recession has had on those families that have experienced job and income loss. But what gets missed is there is a whole segment of the population whose job has been secure and frankly, who have been able to save more and find themselves in a little bit better financial position than they were even before COVID. And so you can imagine if you, to use myself as an example, able to move my work to home. And then for 3 months, my husband and I didn't have to send our child to daycare because we couldn't. So that second mortgage payment that we would pay every month was going into savings. And folks aren't paying for commuting. They're not paying for lunches out. We're not going out to dinner. And nationally, the personal savings rate increased to levels that we haven't seen in decades. All that is just to say that there, for some, and particularly those who had been looking for the opportunity to move into homeownership or to move up, for many folks, their financial situations were in a pretty good place. And when you couple that with low interest rates, it's perhaps not surprising that the pent-up demand that was there in March, April, and May because of the stay-at-home orders kind of all got released in June and July. Picking up on, I have a much simpler map, picking up on Robert's map related to the suburban shift and this idea of this shift to the suburbs. This is a very small map of the Charlottesville area. And what it looks at is, looking at July 2020 sales and comparing it to last year at this time, were there more or less? This is a very crude way to look at it. And I'm going to do a deeper dive into this, but just looking at this very quickly, it does appear that some of the more suburban communities in July are seeing faster rates of home sales activity than say the city of Charlottesville or even Albemarle County. Part of that is due to inventory, lack of supply. Part of that is due to this shift that Robert mentioned about coronavirus sort of encouraging, incentivizing people to want to move to where they can have more space. I'll add that we have to keep in mind, and I mentioned this at the beginning, there were these trends going on before COVID hit. And even before coronavirus hit, we were seeing demand for single family homes and suburban homes increasing even before COVID-19. For those demographic reasons that were mentioned, and we've been seeing more millennials moving into their early 30s, their mid 30s, getting married, having children. There's evidence to suggest that millennials are doing many of the same things that Gen X, I'm a Gen Xer too, and many of the same things Gen Xers did and baby boomers did But because of the 2008 recession, a lot of those milestones are being hit a little bit later, but they have hit. And so we've seen in many regions the demand for suburban homes and homeownership in more suburban communities actually were beginning to increase even last year and the year before. And I think what's happened is COVID may be accelerating that trend a little bit, and probably will result in a continuation of that trend as more of the millennials move into that demographic, and as we maybe on the margins for sure change the way we work, change the way we use our homes. I mentioned inventory, and of all the constraints that we might see in the market going forward, a lack of supply is really the biggest constraint on our market here in Virginia. Statewide, the inventory of available homes for sale is down pretty dramatically. It's been down for years. And so when we think about what might be a risk to the housing market as we head into the third quarter and fourth quarter, it's really on the supply side as opposed to the demand side. The fact that new construction is ramping up is a fantastic sign for the for sale industry as it increases the options available to potential home buyers. It makes people sort of take a look around and see if there are options available, and then perhaps listing their home, knowing that there's a home that they can move up into. In the Charlottesville area, inventory was down about 38% compared to a year ago, but like at the state level, for the first time in a very long time, in the July data showed that the number of new listings coming to market in July was up compared to July of last year, and was actually up compared to June. This is a big deal. What we saw was that buyers returned to the market really quickly in May, June, and certainly into July. Buyer traffic was up in late April. Sellers were coming back a little bit later. There was a little bit more hesitation about perhaps the health risks associated with listing your home and having folks come through, economic uncertainties with, gosh, if we sell our home, will we be able to qualify to purchase a new home since our job might be uncertain? So sellers were a little bit more delayed in their return, but we have seen pretty strong increases in the number of new listings, and a lot of those new listings, to sort of kind of continue on the suburban conversation, is really homes in the suburban communities in the Charlottesville area. Despite the uptick in new listings, there is a very limited amount of inventory available. This is a story that all the realtors on the webinar know quite well. We used to say, right, that 5 or 6 months of supply was a good indicator of a healthy housing market, and we haven't really been there in a while. And in some markets, there's less than 2 months of supply in the Charlottesville area. I'm looking at the city of Charlottesville and Fluvanna County. And as we talked about, new construction's up, and that will help supply. But there is a little bit of a risk. Robert mentioned interest rates, mortgage rates, and mortgage rates have been, as you all know, incredibly low, falling below 3% for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage for 6 consecutive weeks, really unprecedented. Low interest rates provide a tremendous incentive to people who are looking to buy a home. It is, if someone was on the fence or they're wondering when the right time was, being able to come in at a 3% 30-year rate is an incredible incentive. But if you remember the remodeling data that Robert showed low mortgage rates are also an incredible incentive to refinance. And so we've actually seen that the refinance activity has outpaced the new purchase activity in most weeks that we've been tracking the data. And my comment on that then is that as refinance activity has picked up, this will have a dampening effect on inventory as more people decide to remain in their homes as opposed to moving into a bigger home and get into a very low refinanced rate, add on to the home, do the remodeling, and stay put. And so that refinancing activity is going to help keep inventory low. So between the demographic reasons for low inventory and the increase in refinancing activity, I'm afraid I don't see a lot of reasons to think inventory of existing homes for sale are going to increase. and new construction is really going to have to be the driver of any expanded inventory. We look at pending sales, which helps us predict. Actually, August data are out, or will be out later today. I'm sorry I can't share them with you. I haven't had a chance to go through the August data, but it looks like August home sales data are also up, and we know from pending sales data being up at the end by 10% compared to the prior year, and that July pending sales activity was up over June when that typically doesn't happen. All of that signals that this spring market moving into the summer is going to continue into August and then into September as well, as we see continued activity and continued interest along with those low rates. Pending sales in the Charlottesville area were up 30% year over year, and again up in July compared to June, which is not typically what we see in the market. I just want to end before I talk about an outlook a little bit, talk about prices. At the beginning of the coronavirus and in the economic recession, there were some concerns about the impact on home values, home prices. I think Zillow might have put out something that said that nationally home prices were going to fall 6%, and I didn't ever see why that might be true. There just doesn't seem to be any data to suggest, certainly here in Virginia, but even nationwide, a negative price growth or an impact where prices go negative. This is a very different economic recession than 2008, which Robert clearly made that point that in 2008, the downturn really was driven by the housing market and an oversupply of housing and very loose lending requirements that ended up leading to a significant number of delinquencies and foreclosures, which increased supply further, driving prices down. We don't have any of that in the market now. What we do have is incredibly strong demand that's driven by demographics, very low inventory, which has been driven by a confluence of factors, relatively conservative lending requirements, and really no evidence of any major foreclosure activity. We will see an uptick in the foreclosure rate because we always do during downturns. There's always foreclosure activity, but the impact will be very minimum and certainly won't be like what we saw in 2008, and won't have any impact on the negative side on home prices. So home prices were up 7% statewide. In the Charlottesville region, we saw home prices up 3.7%. On the right, there's you can see the bars show Charlottesville prices up, Albemarle prices kind of flat. You can see Louisa County, the median sales price was up. And I wanted to see, are prices being driven up because there's just more sales happening in higher price points, or is the sort of shift happening within price points? And it's a little bit, it's minor, but we are seeing a shift in the Charlottesville area of more sales over $300,000. So on the left, you can see kind of the distribution of prices of homes sold in July 2019. About 31% sold over 400,000, about 21% sold in that 3 to 4. And you can see on the right, the July 2020 figures, those are up a little bit. And so what we're seeing is that these aren't necessarily bigger homes or better located homes being listed, but rather sellers and with the help of their builders and their realtors gauging the market and seeing that demand is so strong that there is the opportunity to list a little bit higher and to see greater price appreciation. And we are seeing that homes that are priced appropriately and homes that are in good condition are being bought very quickly. Days on market continues to fall as people are looking to capitalize on the limited inventory. So talk a little bit about what's ahead for 2020. We talked about that V-shaped housing market recovery. I think, I don't have a formal forecast, but as we talk about the overall economy recovering, I think what we're really looking at is a little bit more uncertainty. As Robert mentioned, it is incredibly difficult to forecast in the best environment. And when we're thinking about the risks that a global health pandemic brings to economic recovery, it makes everything even more uncertain. But there is a possibility of a so-called W recovery of the economy, where we see some improvements, maybe in Q3, but then we see some uncertainties if there's a resurgence in coronavirus cases in the fall and into the winter. If we do see any more stay-at-home directives, businesses closing. We are keeping a close look on unemployment and long-term unemployment. If that continues to expand for more people past that 6-month mark, we could see a longer economic recovery. This swoosh is just that Nike swoosh, so just sort of a long-term over the next couple of years to gain back the jobs that were lost. I'll mention this idea of a K-shaped recovery, which is a kind of a strange thing, strange shape to think about, but what it suggests is that we're seeing really 2 different recoveries. I alluded to this earlier, that there is a segment of the population, a segment of businesses that have been recovering fairly quickly with a lot of resilience here in the end of the summer. But there is a whole segment of the population, a lot of renters, a lot of folks of more modest incomes who aren't seeing their situations improve and instead are the ones that are facing these long-term unemployment prospects. So the economy may be recovering for some, that's the up part of the K, but still on the downward trajectory for some folks in different occupations and different income groups. I mentioned the uncertainties. The new unemployment data came out for Virginia this morning, and initial claims for unemployment benefits had been on the decline. It looks like they ticked up again this week. So again, this sort of up and down, I think, is what we should expect. But despite that, strong home sales activity this summer, we talked about the reasons for that. Low mortgage rates, certainly until early 2020. And I think that's a good thing. As I mentioned, it's incentive. It also has been widely publicized that rates will likely be low well into 2021. That actually reduces perhaps the urgency on the part of would-be buyers who may be dealing with so many other things right now that that knowing that rates are going to remain low, we may see some people who are going to continue to hit pause on their home search as they deal with, I don't know, kids doing virtual learning or figuring out how to continue to work from home or have to go into the office this fall. I think we will see demand for smaller markets, suburban markets like we talked about, both because of coronavirus and the ability to work from home for many people. Reliable high-speed internet will be critical to markets that will attract homeowners. And I think, before COVID, if I was going to come out and talk in the Charlottesville area, we would have talked about housing affordability before COVID, and we're going to be talking about housing affordability as we go forward. So where do we go from here? Kind of focused a little bit on the realtor community with us today. I do expect that virtual tours, social distancing, all those innovative practices that realtors and builders have employed during coronavirus, I think we're going to still need to be ready to deploy those this fall. Whether there's a surge in COVID cases or whether there's people just sort of uncertain and wanting to do things virtually. Inventories are going to become more limited, and so there's this need to show your value add with your properties and with your ability to link potential home buyers with homes. I mentioned low mortgage rates potentially reducing urgency on the part of some home buyers. Demand for housing in smaller communities, in more suburban communities, provided, it's very important, there's reliable high-speed internet access. And when we think about affordability, one reason why we, in addition to lower inventory, in the Charlottesville area, I would anticipate that we'll see increased competition with folks who are looking to the Charlottesville area from perhaps Northern Virginia or the district, looking to move to a smaller region, a smaller metro, and having higher incomes and driving up prices. And so just to conclude, I want to let you know that the Virginia Realtors has a lot of resources on our website. I also do a Facebook Live on the first and third Thursdays, so I hope you'll join me for those. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom, and I look forward to the questions. And thanks again for the chance to come and be part of this with y'all today.
For being with us today and being a part of both of our associations. We certainly appreciate all the insight that you share. At this time, we'd love to be able to open it up to questions and answers, a session For those of you who'd like to ask a question, please submit that question via the question or chat box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll go ahead and start fielding some of those questions. A couple did actually show up while we were talking, so we'll start with those. But Lisa, I did want to let you know, I've heard a lot about this K recovery, and it keeps popping up over and over again, and I think there's a lot of merit to that. So can you expand just a tad a bit more for our group on that, and share a little bit more?
Yeah. Thanks for letting me have a chance to talk about it. I think we hear a lot about the overall recovery kind of at the macro level. And, you know, as everyone on the webinar knows, like all of these decisions are being made at the individual family level, right? And so what's happening in your recovery is really what the most important, the important trend is. And so what we're seeing is that there are mostly individuals working in kind of white collar occupations, professional and technical services jobs, people who are very easily able to shift to working from home to continue their work without interruption, people who don't have to go to an office or interface with the public, people who frankly had higher wages to begin with, who were homeowners to begin with. For these folks, coronavirus and the economic downturn have created certainly challenges, but by and large, the economic impact hasn't been as severe as it has for another group of individuals and families, and those include folks who work in the industries that have been hardest hit. So, you know, 1 out of 4 Virginians receiving unemployment benefits was employed in the food services industry. You know, as restaurants shut down, there was no ability to, you know, to go into work and to earn a wage. And so as those restaurant closures become more permanent, the folks in that industry are seeing these longer term job losses. At the same time, there's another group of folks for whom, you know, the ability to return to work means that you have to be on site. I'm thinking about retail workers, folks who work in administrative positions in healthcare offices. These are folks who are faced, frankly, with daunting decisions, right? In some cases, my kid is virtual at school. I need to go back to the office. I don't know how I'm going to do this. Oh, and by the way, the rent is due and my unemployment is running out. As you all know, expanded unemployment benefits ended at the end of July, and still a little unclear about what the next phase looks like. So, I mean, that's one way to do this divide by occupation. And I think it's just helpful for us to remember that as we think about these overall recovery numbers, that the life looks very different in some parts of our community.
Agreed. Well, I'm going to go ahead and field a couple of questions that have popped up. The first one being that I see that I think it's worth mentioning is from Kelly Tripp. And it is, what can we expect with either outcome of the election? Would either of you like to field that question?
Robert, you can go on this one.
Yeah, so I think the election is important, and as housers, I think is how we like to say it, you know, not Democrats or Republicans. There's a mix of risks and issues that are at play. I think one of the things that the Trump administration had was a number of regulatory improvements. We know that regulations are a big impact on the cost of new construction. We estimate that about 24% of the price of a typical newly built home consists of regulatory burdens. And so we did get a rollback of some of that. That was good. So some of those issues could be at risk, things like waters of the US, independent contractor rules. On the other side, you know, the Trump administration's been very skeptical of the role of Fannie and Freddie, which help keep interest rates low. I think if the Democrats win, we'll get maybe a little bit more kind of positive momentum on those issues. I think lumber is the thing that keeps me awake at night, and it certainly did last night again. I started seeing some of the data. I would love to see the tariffs on Canadian lumber suspended temporarily, just to get some more competition in the lumber market, and that's an area as well. But you know, the focus tends to be on the presidential election. For housing, we all know local. It's the local elections. So if we care about inventory, it's all about reducing those regulatory burdens, improving zoning rules, building with density with things like townhouses, making sure we have affordable rental housing. So pay attention to those local elections. They really, really matter.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll just sort of add another angle on the presidential election. I often get that question a lot, particularly if I'm talking with folks up in Northern Virginia. They're like, oh my gosh, a new administration, there's going to be all this turnover, right? We're going to have people flooding in looking to buy homes. And I looked at the 2016 data when we had the last election, and we see a little bit of a shift in timing in some cases in Northern Virginia in terms of when home buying happens. We see a little teeny bump in March following the inauguration in Northern Virginia, not in this across the state. And so we sort of estimate that maybe there's like a 4 or 5% kind of uptick in sales activity in a typical presidential election when there's a big turnover. But by and large, the people who are going to work in the next administration already live here. And frankly, a lot of the people who might come in with new members of Congress are young folks, and they are living 5 to a house. They're not looking to buy a home in McLean. So I think that the presidential election on that side of it, aside from the regulatory and the policy related issues, ends up having less of an impact, I think, than some people expect.
If I could add to that, if we think about policy that's going to be held constant, regardless of what happens with the Senate and the White House, the Federal Reserve, they have just, and this gets to Lisa's K-shaped recovery. One of the things the Federal Reserve announced that's really important for housing is this idea they're going to be looking at average inflation rates for setting monetary policy. And I use the line from Chairman Powell about they're not thinking about raising interest rates. The reason why is the Fed has basically said they're going to let the economy run hot. They saw the benefits that came particularly to low-income households of letting low unemployment last longer than maybe economists would have said 20 years ago. So they want to get us back to low unemployment, and they're willing to risk a little bit of inflation to get there. That's good news for housing, and it's one of the things that we can do to correct that K-shaped recovery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. I have a question from one of our members. Is VAR talking to the internet providers about the need to increase access to high-speed internet? And I would actually send that to both of you, because I know both associations are really focused in on this, especially with the transition with schooling the kids from home.
Yeah, I think at the state level, we were working with the governor's office on broadband access issues last year. This idea of bringing state money and trying to leverage some local money to bring access to communities that don't have high-speed internet. And it is becoming clearer and clearer that internet access has to be treated like a utility, like water, right? Like electricity. And I think the fact that this virtual learning has brought that to light even further in Virginia will, I think, push this this expanding broadband access, and Virginia Realtors will, of course, continue to advocate for that. It is a pretty, I mean, you all know this, right? You're trying to sell a home or build a home in a place that doesn't have reliable broadband, and it's kind of a non-starter for many people. So I would argue that at the national level too, that this issue of access is going to be front of mind of many lawmakers.
Yeah, we used to say, one of my predecessors used to quote it all the time. You've all heard the line that a home is where a job goes at night. Well, in this new environment where 24% of the workforce is working at home, it's where a job may be during the day as well. So, smart housing is something that you see a lot in terms of new construction, in terms of the infrastructure. So we need it both in new and existing. These offer remodeling opportunities. And I wholeheartedly agree with Lisa. We need to be thinking about this like a utility, because it's not just jobs, it's also education for children. If this may not be the last virus. So let's make sure our housing is resilient.
I think, when you are talking about home offices and the opportunity for people to either remodel or move into something new, and we talk about the home office or the need for two, it's not even just about, what we used to call the study in a house. It actually has to be quieter. We're doing Zoom calls. Some of us are doing podcasts and remote webinars from our homes, and interruptions. And there's so many things to be thinking about today. So a lot on the forecast as Parade of Homes come up in all different areas. We're doing ours virtual this year from the association. So it's going to be a little bit different than we've been accustomed to before. I'm going to actually share a question from Candace. With the challenge of no hands-on schooling and the need for training industry and skilled workers, what's the forecast on education for trade schools and impacting further demand for laborers within the construction industry?
Yeah, if you look at the so-called JOLTS data, this is a great data resource that kind of gives us a sense of job openings. We're short right now somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 construction workers nationwide. So the need is there. You know, when we went into the downturn, I had some snarky journalists reach out to me and said, "Where's your skilled labor crisis now?" And I said, "Just you wait. Housing is going to rebound. It's going to be rebounding first, and we're going to be right back to where we were in terms of skills." And the skilled crisis is due to the fact that more people are going to college. So it is harder to recruit people into construction. But I think this is an exercise, whether it's state and local associations, partnering with like organizations like the Home Builders Institute that does training, where we need to use the real gem of the U.S. education system, which is the community colleges. And so that interaction of trying to get middle skilled people, and again, this gets back to the K-shaped recovery.
Yes, it does.
Bringing people into the construction industry, which is often a great place to start small businesses. And I think that's going to be something we see a lot of over the next 5 years.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, I think community colleges are such a great place for this type of training to happen. I also think there's an expanded role for our vocational education at the high school level. And I think as we've seen the growing challenges of college student debt and more students being saddled with debt for college degrees that either in some cases they don't complete or in other cases don't transfer into higher incomes, making another path forward be as, I don't know, like accepted and like being
Sexy.
proud of it. Yeah, sexy. That's right. And like, so your parents say, "Oh yeah, no, he's not going to Yale. He's going, you know, he's going to become a skilled electrician." And because of, you know, that is a sexy, like exciting place to be working right now. And I feel like, you know, not all of that can happen at the high school level, at the vocational ed level. But when I grew up in Vermont and we had, our high school was half voc ed, half traditional. And it was like a fantastic way to open up opportunities to kids for whom college may not have been, you know, in their path for whatever reasons. And I don't know, I think, I don't know anything about it, but it feels to me like Robert said, in addition to community colleges, like different paths and having them be, you know, attractive is really important.
I think the National Association of Home Builders definitely has made some impact in terms of getting the word out from a workforce development, increased awareness program. And it's certainly been beneficial. We locally here talk a little bit about the workforce development and what that can do. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. It has to start from our high schools. It has to be supported by parents. You hear lots of folks coming out of programs where they have, you know, 4-year degrees, but they have so much debt. And boy, if you have some business savvy and you can go get, you know, a journeyman's license and become an electrician, you could be running a business 5 years and have people working for you and no debt. So there is something to be said about that. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit more and go back to the lumber conversation. I have two different arenas as far as questions are concerned. One from actually Tom Wolfup. What impact will rising lumber prices have on available new build inventory going forward, given that the prices will rise as a result?
Well, the thing we see in our surveys is incremental gains in new construction pricing. That is going to filter through. And by the way that we think about this in terms, it's not immediate. So when we see increases in the spot lumber market, it affects lumber yards first, then remodelers who tend to buy, you know, just in time. So they're paying the higher price. So, you know, if you want to watch, talk to your local remodelers, go to your contact and ask them how they're doing. Are they deferring projects because of those pricing? I know in my own neighborhood, I know Lisa's familiar with my neighborhood in Northern Virginia, we're supposed to replace all the patio fencing. That's been put off because the pricing's so high. And then it filters out to remodelers, to regional builders, and then lastly, national builders. So don't look at the national builders for commentary on this. Some of them have long-term contracts and hedging mechanisms. But the net impact is, and I see it in our surveys already, builder confidence is really, really strong because of the demand side. But in the commentary, they say lumber's our top issue. And I have builders emailing me every day of, here's what we paid a year ago, here's what we're paying now. It's adding $16,000, $20,000 to the price. and some people will get sticker shock. And so if you're looking for something besides a tick up in rates that can cause the market to take a breather, it is lumber right now.
I think that goes back to your urgency standpoint, Lisa, for people who are putting off those decisions for 2021. Why not, make a decision now and put that sense of urgency out there if you're one of the local builders that is a little worried about that and you have people trying to maybe put off that decision. That could be one of those, good urgency incentives. And then I did see another question that said a little concern about natural disasters and lumber prices. Robert, the forecast is strong for hurricanes coming into this season. Is that something people are watching as well?
Hurricanes and sort of other natural disasters will have to include wildfires, and this do represent a growing risk for housing. They're going to be a political risk because I know in the economics community, a lot of research focused on those types of issues. In terms of building material pricing, what you tend to see is after a natural disaster, pricing for things like PVC, particle board, and lumber tends to go up about 3 to 6 months, particularly as you get repair, a little bit of increased apartment construction, and then pricing goes back to normal. I think the big thing on building materials issues right now is that the global supply chains are highly disruptive. So whether it's builders in North Carolina or Texas, I'm hearing increasingly that things like windows and doors that they know have been produced in Chile or in parts of China are sitting in the dock because the ships aren't moving. And a lot of product moved on commercial airplanes. People think it's just luggage underneath those planes. It's not. It's a lot of products. And so those supply chains mean that's going to take longer. So if you're working with new construction builds, expect higher costs and expect some delays. That's just the natural consequence of some of the supply chain disruptions. And natural disasters are just kind of another wild card in the mix.
Absolutely, and even in the Gulf with the rigs in the Gulf and the prices of gas, and that uptick is certainly making an impact. And I had somebody comment on one of those in the questions is, aren't we already seeing a manufacturer's uptick, a delay in getting lighting and plumbing supplies and things of that nature? So it's already existing. And I know we are right at the tail end of our time for questions from the audience, but I did get a question that had to do with immigration and our workforce development. Anybody want to end with a brief comment in regards to that?
Well, I'll start off, maybe Lisa, maybe we could talk about the demand side, but on the supply side, look, immigrants are a quarter of the construction labor force when you count, just looking at construction occupations, it's up to half in some states. It does have demand side effects, but NHB is a big believer in immigration reform. It's an important part of our workforce development, but I think unfortunately, because of the virus and we were talking about supply chains, we're not going to see a lot of immigration in the coming years. So on the supply side, in terms of labor force development, we have to do that essentially on our own and make the recruitment effort to those who have lost jobs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think sort of maybe touching back on a little bit on the K-shaped recovery and how it sort of has been intersecting with this broader conversation about inclusion and diversity and expanding opportunity more broadly. As we think about how to expand a workforce, those are really great opportunities, right? As we're talking about bringing more people into different kinds of communities that maybe have been on the margins or a little bit excluded or haven't been the first people you think of, I guess. I'm, thinking about, I don't know as much for sure about the home building side, but I'm thinking about like girls and women and, other people who may not have been the first of mind when it comes to working in certain trades and occupations. I think this is a fantastic opportunity since we're kind of talking about this inclusion and diversity more broadly.
I agree. I had the great fortune of meeting an amazing female welder on one of our jobs just recently, and she was just a force to be reckoned with. So I agree, there is an opportunity. Thank you both.
Sure.
Tom?
Jody, thanks for facilitating. This is very, very interesting. Lisa, Robert, appreciate your insights. Give us lots of information that we, can think with and pass along to our clients. Makes us more knowledgeable, and it's just always good to know, what are the trends, not just locally, but see what's happening nationwide, because everything's connected and it will affect us at some point. So we rely on you. You dig into this stuff and give it to us in a way that we can understand. So it's Very much appreciated. Thank you again.
Thanks for having us.
I want to make a note. Today's session is recorded. It'll be available on CAAR's YouTube channel early next week, so you can reference it again, share it with your colleagues, clients if you wish. Might be a little technical, but you never know what people are interested in. Okay, to conclude this morning's meeting, I would like to welcome the following new Realtor members. You should see that pop up on your screen there. We have quite a number, so if you get a chance, run into them, tell them welcome. In addition, I'd like to welcome the following new affiliate members. Again, if you run into them, give them a hearty welcome. As a reminder, you can find a list of our affiliate companies using the affiliates icon on the single sign-on dashboard. I want to thank all of you again for joining this morning's meeting. Very good information. We had a lot of people on. I'm not going to name you all by name, but thanks for staying involved. And I want to wish everyone a good day today. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.